narrative of Yosef was interrupted with a different story, a story of Yehuda, who went aside from his brothers. It's a colorful narrative. And that was away yesterday. So we didn't study it together. Now, the beginning of Chamishi, which also heralds the 39th chapter of the book of Genesis, we return to the story of Joseph. Vayeshev hurad Mitzrayim, the Torah says. Yosef was brought down into Egypt. Vayiknehu Potiphar Siris Paroi. Potiphar was amidst the officers and nobility of the Pharaoh, and Siris also could mean a eunuch, as we'll soon see. He was Sarat HaBachim. He was the chief butcher. And there's a dispute amongst our sages whether that means he was the chief executioner or the person who was in charge of meat packing. At any rate, he was a powerful man in Egypt. He was an Ishmitzi. He's an Egyptian man. And he is the one who bought him Miyada Yishmaelim, from the hands of the Ishmaelim, Asher Hoiriduhu Shama, who brought Yosef HaTzadik down. So Rashi tells us, Vayeshev Hurad, the fifth reading, the 39th chapter, is Chazer Le'inyan Rishon. We now return to the original narrative. The story began with Joseph and his brothers, and now we return to this. So why did we stop talking? Why did we go away from it? The reason that the Torah interrupted the story of Yosef being sold with the story of Yehuda and his, shall we say, colorful little event over there, is because we want to tell you something. It was because of Joseph that Judah was demoted. And once Judah was demoted, so that's when things kind of went down, as they did. He was away from his brothers. And furthermore, there's another reason why we have the story of Yehuda and Tamar, his erstwhile daughter-in-law, who became the individual who carried his children. And we juxtapose this to the story of Ishtai Shel Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar. So the truth is, somebody posted on Facebook, posted this class, he said, who is Potiphar? He's not exactly a famous biblical figure. He doesn't play, he's not one of our heroes, let's just say that. But he's a person who is instrumental at a certain point in the biblical narrative. Not that he's a big tzaddik who does anything right, but he's a figure, like the Pharaoh's a figure. And perhaps the wife of Potiphar plays even a larger role, as we'll see. And all of this is loy malacha, to tell you that Ma'azoi, just as Tamar, who did some very strange things, did it l'shem shamayim, she did it with the purest of intentions. Afzu, the wife of Potiphar, even though she seems like an entirely licentious and debaucherous person, she had some kind of l'shem shamayim. She also had like a higher intention. It wasn't just about the pursuit of libido or sensual pleasure. Rasa be'itztrologin shala. She saw through her machinations of astronomy and astrology, that she saw with certainty that she was destined to bring children into the world through Joseph. But she did not know if this would happen through her, if this would happen through her daughter. A typical Hollywood story. Anyway, that's how the story of Yosef, how and why the story of Yosef, which is the major event here, gets interrupted with a little bit of what seems to be a tangential narrative. And now we return to the primary focus. And so let's talk about Joseph. So Joseph was Hurad Mitzrayim. Rabbi Avram and Rambam says that the Torah uses the words Hurad, not Yorad. That's to tell you that Joseph was not happy about this journey. He wasn't like, wow, I can finally get away from my brothers. I can start to live on my own. He was deeply, deeply pained. This was a very, very bad thing for him. And the Dazakenim Baalei HaTosfos say, Hurad, to remind us that Joseph here plays an outsized role, an oversized role. He thinks that he is being going, or the details of whatever, however it happened that he's going down, but all of this is Gzeiros HaMakim to the Baalei HaTesvos. This is ultimately the decree of HaShem, and there's a bigger story that's going on here. So that he's propelled by a more powerful force. And he buys him. Vayikneu Potiphar Sispari, the Targum Yonasan says that the Sispari didn't just buy any slave. He bought Joseph. On the slave market, he took a look at this guy. And Potiphar, he was a sick puppy. He wanted him for... He wanted for other things. Joseph was a very handsome boy. He's a pretty boy. And he took one look at this kid. He said, oh, this is the kind of fun I'm looking for. And that's why he bought Joseph. And that's why we talk about Sris Pira right after, which according to Onkelos and the Medrash Tev is a Sar. It's like an officer. He was a high-ranking person in Egyptian society.
How old was Joseph at the time?
17 years old. A kid. But the word Sris also means castrated or eunuch, a person who's impotent. And so there was a miracle that happened that Hashem made sure that he became a Saris, that he was no longer able to do what he wanted to do. He lost that ability. And having lost that ability, Yosef was safe. Well, he was safe from Potiphar, but not safe from his crazy wife. So that's what happens. And Yosef is in this very precarious situation, a pretty boy in a society that idolizes physical beauty and is entirely steeped in sexuality. This is where Yosef is hurled into. And what happens? What happens is, Vayihi HaShem es Yosef. God is with Joseph. Vayihi ish matzliach. He's a very successful man. Vayihi beveis hadein v'hamitzi. And there he was, in the home of his master. So the Torah seems to be saying a number of things over here, like 3 things. Vayihi Hashem es Yosef. God's with Joseph. 1. A new thing. Vayihi ish matzliach. I don't know if there's another pasuk like this in the whole Torah where you have the word Vayihi, which usually heralds like a new epoch or begins a new chapter, a new narrative. Vayihi. Here we have Vayihi 3 times. Vayihi Hashem es Yosef. Vayihi ish matzliach. God's with Joseph. And it comes to pass that he is successful. Vayihi beveis hadoinav, and he's in his master's home. What is the point being made over here? So the Kli Yakar says, when people get very successful, especially they manage to acclimatize to a new society, a new culture, and then things go well for them. So they want to be part, they want to have fun. He's a kid, remember, it's a young person. So the Kli Yakar says, yeah, he was very successful. God's with Joseph. And because he's with Joseph, he's successful. But if he didn't go out to the nightclubs, he didn't stay at home. He stayed home, did his work. He wasn't looking to join Egyptian society. The Radak says he was successful in everything. And he was successful in his own personal life, in his master's home, everything. On every level he was successful. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us in his Torah, Vayihi, you should understand who Yosef was. And understand Yosef was a star. And that's when Potiphar's wife raised her eyes up. And she looked at this star, this young star, his stud. And she said, I want him. This is the guy I'm after. And the Orach Chaim says that the Vayihi kind of traces the trajectory, the rise of a star. First off, he started Vayihi Yosef ish matzliach. He's got some lowly, menial task, and he's super successful. And the next thing we hear, Vayihi ish matzliach. Now he's a somebody. He's very successful. And ultimately, he's Vayihi beis hadoinav. He rises to prominence in the estate of his master's home. So what does it mean when we say Vayihi Hashem es Yosef, that God is with Yosef? What does it mean? It means he's successful. That's what it means ostensibly. The Zaken and Baalei HaTesvos followed the thesis they began, and they said God was with Joseph in ensuring that Potiphar dried up and was no longer capable of doing the kinds of things he wanted to do. So God basically protected Joseph. Joseph didn't even know what was coming down the pike. He didn't even know how he had been protected, but Hashem protected him. And then the next pasuk says, Vayara Dainov, ki Hashem itay. Not only was Joseph with them, but this pedophile, sex abuser, who wanted to take advantage of a 17-year-old slave and turn him into a sex slave, he noticed that God is with him. He notices that everything Joseph does, Hashem makes successful in his hands. So what happened? We'll see in a moment what happens. But the interesting question is, what does this mean? Ki Hashem itay. And Rashi says, you know what it means? Ki Hashem itoi. I'll tell you what it means. It means Shem Shamayim Shagar B'fiv. It means that the name of heaven, Shem Shamayim, God's name, is always on his lips. And that's the meaning of Vayihi Ki Hashem itoi, that God is with him. Now this is really interesting, because in verse 2 where it says Vahi Hashem es Yosef, it doesn't say that Shem Shamayim Shagar B'fiv. Rashi doesn't say anything. It's understood. God is with him in a variety of ways. And here, in verse 3, where it says seemingly the same thing, Vayara Dainav Ki Hashem itoi, which you would think this is a continuation of verse 2. In verse 2 it says God is with him. Should have means Shem Shamayim Shagar B'fiv. The name of heaven is always on his lips. And then verse 2 is Vayara Dainav Ki Hashem itoi. Not only is God with him, his master saw God was with him. Well, in that case, why did Rashi come along and comment only on the second Vayara Dainav? Why didn't he comment the first time around? And especially because anybody would read this verse, Vayi Hashem es Yosef, and they would say, what does that mean? God was with Joseph. In fact, the Torah even tells us what it means. It tells us that he was Ish Matzliach. God was with him, so he was successful. So if God is with him and he's successful, why would verse 3 have to be speaking about Yosef's behavior, Yosef's being constantly invoking the name of God, when after all, the Torah could simply have, Rashi could have said nothing. I mean, in verse 2 it says, God is with him, he's successful. And verse 3 says, and his master notices this. And because his master notices this, he raises him to a position of tremendous prominence and ultimately gives him the keys. So trust you implicitly. Do as you understand you should. So this is really the question here. So it's a serious question. Why does Rashi choose to interpret it in this fashion? So the Rebbe talks about this, and he says something very interesting, and that will be the remainder of today's class. I invite you to open the Yerei Chumash book. We're going to go to page Reish Yud Zayin, Siman Lamed Vav. So the Rebbe asks the obvious question. Rashi tells us, so the words Ki Hashem itoi, that God is with him, doesn't mean that God's with him makes him successful. No, it means Shem Shamayim Shagar B'fiv. It means that he's mentioning the name of God. He says Baruch Hashem. So tzarich bir madua in Rashi mefarish hasakosif ki pshutei. Isn't Rashi after all the master of pshuta shel mikra? If he is the master of the literal meaning, he should have interpreted this straightforwardly, literally, which means God is with him. When you say to somebody, God be with you, what does it mean? You should say Baruch Hashem all day. God be with you means you should be successful. And the Torah says that. It says that God was with him and he was successful. Vayi Hashem itei, and it says, Vayi Ish Matzliach. So the Torah basically says that that's what it means. And Rashi comes along and he says, no, it's not what it means. But it means Ki Hashem itei, that he's saying Baruch Hashem. You say to me, Zu, furthermore, it says Vayi Hashem es Yosef. It says that before. Later on, we're going to read this in the 23rd verse, where it says when Yosef is now hurled into prison because of being framed by the monstrous Potiphar's wife, blaming him for everything, and not getting her way and her indiscretion, and she throws Yosef into prison as a result of this. She actually wanted him killed. Potiphar felt bad, and he knew she was lying, so he put him in prison. Ein beis. It says that the one who was in charge of the jail, he knew nothing. Why? Because he trusted Joseph. Why did he trust Joseph? Because God was with him. Visham, and there, in Rashi, Rashi does not try in any way to reconstrue the words from their obvious and literal meaning, which means Hashem itay, God is with him, he is successful. Full stop. Madua, why is it? Dafke kan, specifically here, we have 3 times in a row, not the first time, not the third time, but the middle time the Torah talks about God being with him. Why is it here that Rashi decides to comment and say, it does not mean what you think it means? Namely, he's successful. God is with him. Amazing things are happening. No. It means he was a Chassidish Yid. He said, Baruch Hashem all the time.
But it's not talking about the first one. It's talking about some...
Well, it's all one continuum. It's all one Joseph.
It's all about 2 different things. So.
Yeah, but it's one domino series of successes. We're not really talking about 2 things. The Torah is describing the reality of Yosef. Here's Yosef in Mitzrayim being wildly successful. V'yesh leimer. So the Rebbe says, here's the key. Hasib l'kach, the reason that Rashi here chooses to comment, not earlier and not later, but here, is because there is a koishi hamisayder dafke because of a yara deinav ki Hashem ite. There is a challenge, a difficulty in understanding this narrative, specifically here in verse 3. What's the challenge? What's different about the God being with him in the beginning, in verse 2, the God being with him in verse 23, and the God being with him in verse 3? The difference is that here it says, Vayar Adoinov, his master saw. It doesn't say his master saw it was successful. It doesn't say his master saw that he's got rabbit's feet or golden horseshoes. It says his master saw that God was with him. Who was his master? A lecherous, debaucherous individual who had no whims about purchasing a 17-year-old boy with the intention of sexually abusing him. A person who could have been the chief executioner, or at the very best, all he was a meat packer, a powerful one too. A person who could do as he pleases, living in Egypt, which was the place that absolutely denied the presence of any kind of monotheistic reality. You were not mentioned monotheism in Egypt. They were entirely obsessed with the bodily and corporeal reality. They believed in an afterlife, but they had to preserve your corporeal remains for you to get the afterlife. They used to preserve the bodies because couldn't have a soul without a body. They couldn't envision this. So this society that idealizes the flesh, he saw that Hashem is with Yosef. How did he see that? That's a huge question. And the Torah says he saw it. Why would Potiphar, if you ask Potiphar why he's successful, he would say because Potiphar is smart. Because Potiphar is brave. Because Potiphar has guts. That's what he would say. Just like any tycoon today, ask him why he's successful. He gets up, he talks about God. Ask him why he's successful. He says, because I'm great. And Potiphar takes a look at Yosef's meteoric rise and success, and he says, oh, Hashem is with him. I see Hashem is with him. Why? Why would Potiphar attribute a lucky kid's success to God?
And what's the effect of that on Potiphar?
The effect that he trusts him implicitly, which puts Yosef in an even more precarious situation. And all of that, of course, is by divine design, because he'll end up in prison and from there he'll become the viceroy. Potiphar was like all of Egypt, he was an idolater. If anything, he should have given credence to Yosef, saying, he must worship the idols well. Not that he's a recipient of God's beneficence. When Pharaoh is approached by Moshe Rabbeinu, and he says, I'm here, God has sent me. And the Pharaoh doesn't say, oh, God. You mean he's getting involved now here, eh? He says, what are you talking about? He says, Lo yadaiti es Hashem, I don't know who God is. Never heard of God. Egypt never heard of God. So Egypt never heard of God, and Potiphar attributes also success to God. It makes no sense. It's a huge problem. V'lachein, Pirush Rashi, this is why Rashi comes along and says, Shem Shamayim, Shoger Befiv. The name of Hashem is on his lips. Mikivon, Shakol his damnos. Every opportunity that Joseph had, what was he always doing? Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. He's talking about God all day. So the Potiphar saw, what is up with this kid? I know two things about him. He has incredible success, and he seems to be praising this invisible God day in, day out. And so, Potiphar said, the only reason I could possibly suggest, where are you going? They're finished over there already. You're sending him away? What are you doing? 2 more minutes, they're finished. He says the only reason he could suggest that Yosef should be successful like this, the only reason is, it's connected to God. Why? The guy doesn't stop talking about God. There's no other reason why he should be successful. So because Yosef lived a life of Kiddush Hashem, because Yosef lived a life acknowledging Hashem's presence, what happened as a result? The Potiphar started to believe in God. What an incredible lesson this is for us. You walk around professing your faith for Hashem, and around you people start saying, so there is a God. Yosef didn't evangelize him. Yosef didn't try to convert him. Yosef didn't say, listen, master, let me tell you about God. I'll tell you a little story you never heard before. Nothing. He just said Baruch Hashem. That's all he did. He lived a life of pure devotion to Hashem, and he wasn't ashamed about it. He didn't hide his Jewish values. He walked out with his head held high, and he talked about the fact that he believed everything was a gift from God. And therefore, Yoda Potiphar liyachas. Potiphar came to the conclusion by himself. He said, the only reason that this kid is successful has got to be something with that God of his. And therefore, hapsukim ha'achedim, the other psukim, the reason that the Rashi doesn't say anything here is because they don't present any problem. They're describing the success of Yosef. They're not describing Potiphar as noticing the success. So if you're describing the success of Yosef, you say God was with him. He was successful. What does it mean? It means what it says. It means that he was successful because God was with him. But here Rashi has a problem. Because here it says, Vayar Adoinav. Potiphar saw this. How did he see it? What did he see? He saw success, fine. How did he see God? And the answer is, Shem Shomayim Shogar Befiv. And therefore, in the other verses, Rashi has no need to comment. It's here that Rashi is compelled to share with you. And invariably, as a result of this, we see the Torah communicates to us not only what happened with Yosef, but also what Yosef was able to engender around him. Here he is, a 17-year-old kid, snatched from his home, sold as a slave, and just by living a life as a Jew, already he's making a difference. What a powerful lesson for all of us. Okay, to be continued.
And if he wasn't successful, it wouldn't